I didn't cry when my daughter told me not to come. I just stood there in my kitchen holding the phone with both hands, looking at the little crack on the countertop I'd been meaning to fix for 6 years. And I thought, so this is what it comes to. She'd called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because I had just gotten back from the grocery store and my feet were aching. I'm 64 years old and I've had bad arches since my 40s, and I always push myself too hard at that store. Always think I can do one more aisle. I was sitting down to take my shoes off when the phone rang. "Mom," she said, "about Saturday. I think it's better if you don't come to the opening." I didn't say anything for a moment. "Just, it's going to be a professional crowd," she said. "Clients, investors, you know." I said, "I know what an opening is, sweetheart. I've been to a few." She laughed a little. Nervous laugh. The same one she's had since she was 9 years old and broke my good serving bowl and tried to blame it on the cat. "It's just going to be a lot of standing around, Mom." "You'd be bored." I told her I wouldn't be bored. I told her I'd been looking forward to it for months. "I know," she said, "but honestly, the space is small and we already have so many RSVPs. I said her name, once, quietly, and she stopped talking. I asked her to be honest with me. There was a long pause, long enough that I looked out the window at my neighbor's oak tree and counted 3 birds on the fence before she spoke again. "It's just okay, Mom. You know how I feel about first impressions. And this crowd, they're going to be asking about my background, where I trained, my family. And I don't want it to be complicated." Complicated. That was the word she used. I'm complicated. I told her okay. I told her I understood. And then I said goodbye, and I set the phone down on the counter next to my grocery bags. And I sat very still for probably 10 minutes, just breathing. Then I went and put the milk away, because the milk doesn't care about any of this, and neither did I. Not yet. Let me tell you a little about my daughter, because I want you to understand her, not just be angry at her. She's 36. She has her father's eyes and my stubbornness, and she's always wanted something bigger than the life she came from. I don't say that as a criticism. I understand it. I grew up in a row house in Baltimore, with 5 people sharing one bathroom, and I wanted more too. Wanting more is not a character flaw. But somewhere along the way, wanting more became wanting different. And different started to include different parents. Her name is Renata. I named her after my grandmother, who came here from the Dominican Republic with nothing but a sewing machine and a determination that could bend steel. I used to tell Renata that story when she was little. I thought it would make her proud of where she came from. I'm not sure when it stopped. Her father and I divorced when she was 12. It was not a good divorce. There's no such thing, I think, despite what the self-help books say. And I raised her mostly alone after that. I worked as a licensed practical nurse for 27 years. Night shifts, double shifts, holidays, the works. I know what tired looks like. I've seen it in mirrors at 6 a.m. after 14 hours on a floor when I was 58 years old and my back felt like it was held together with masking tape. I did all of it for her, and I would do it again. That's not the point. The point is the salon. Renata had been talking about opening her own beauty business for years. She's a talented stylist, genuinely talented, the kind who builds clientele by word of mouth alone. When the pandemic happened, she lost her chair at the salon where she'd been working, and she pivoted fast, built up her own clients, started doing house calls, saved money, and then about 2 years ago, she told me she'd found a space. She needed $65,000. She had about $28,000 of her own saved. She needed the rest. I had $41,000 in a savings account I've been building since 2009. It was my retirement cushion, what I called my just-in-case money. Just in case the roof needed replacing. Just in case I got sick. Just in case. I gave her $37,000 of it. I kept $4,000 back. I'm not sure why I kept $4,000 and not more. Maybe I just needed to feel like I was keeping something. We went to the bank together. I remember she hugged me in the parking lot afterward, this long, tight hug, and she said, "Mom, I'm going to make you so proud." And I believed her. I believed her completely, the way you believe your children when they're standing right in front of you with their arms around you. That was 14 months before she told me not to come to the opening. In between those 14 months, there had been changes, small ones at first. She got an Instagram account for the salon, and the photos were beautiful, styled shoots, professional lighting, the kind of thing that makes a little spot in a strip mall look like something in a magazine. I followed her account. I liked her posts. I commented sometimes. She asked me once gently to maybe not comment so much. It's a branding thing, Mom. I just want the comments to stay on topic. I stopped commenting. Then there was the Christmas party. She had one at the salon, just a small thing for clients and friends. I showed up and she introduced me to people, but I noticed something. When someone asked how she got started, she talked about her savings, her planning, her hustle. She didn't mention the money. Which is fine, I told myself. It's her business. People don't have to know everything. But then I heard her tell one woman that she'd done it completely independently. And I turned and looked at the little holiday wreath on the wall, and I told myself I was being sensitive. Then in the spring, she started dating someone. His name is Trevor, and he comes from what I'll politely call a different kind of family. The kind where the holiday cards go out professionally photographed, and the children go to schools that cost more than my annual salary used to be. I have nothing against Trevor. He's polite. He opens doors. He calls me ma'am. But I noticed that when I came to things, the occasional dinner, once a birthday party for a friend of hers, there was something in the way Renata moved when I was in a room with Trevor's friends. A kind of tension, like she was watching me, waiting for me to say something wrong, do something embarrassing, remind everyone of something she'd rather they didn't know. I started making excuses not to come to things. I told myself I was imagining it. I was not imagining it. The week after she told me not to come to the opening, I kept myself busy. That's what I do. I cleaned out the hall closet I'd been avoiding for 2 years. I repotted my African violets. I drove over to my friend Cecilia's house. She's my age, been my friend since we were both young mothers in the same neighborhood, and I sat at her kitchen table and I told her the whole story. Cecilia has a way of listening that makes you feel like the words are safe. She doesn't rush to fix anything. She just nods and pours more coffee. When I finished, she said, "What do you want to do?" I told her I didn't know. "Yes, you do," she said. I went home and I sat with it, and what I kept coming back to was not the hurt. Though the hurt was there, I'm not going to pretend it wasn't, but something more practical, something that had been nagging at me since that Christmas party. I had given my daughter $37,000. I had not asked for a contract. I had not asked for repayment terms. I had not asked for repayment terms. I had not asked for anything, because she was my daughter and I trusted her. But that money had gone somewhere, into that salon, into those walls and that equipment and that lease. I was a co-signer on that lease. She had asked me to co-sign 8 months prior because her credit score, while good, wasn't quite enough on its own for the landlord's requirements. I'd done it without hesitation. It was a 3-year lease on a commercial property in a nice part of town. I'd signed my name and I hadn't thought about it again. But now I was thinking about it. I pulled up my copies of the paperwork. I spread everything on my dining room table and I read through it carefully, more carefully than I had the first time. And I called a lawyer friend of mine, a woman named Daisy, who I'd met years ago through a church group and who'd since become someone I trusted completely. I told her what I had. I asked her what it meant. She called me back the next evening. "You're on that lease as a guarantor," she said. "You're financially responsible as payments default." I told her I knew that. "What you may not know," she said, "is that as a guarantor with a financial contribution to the business, which is documentable through your bank transfer records, you have a legitimate argument for some form of equity interest, or at minimum, a formal repayment agreement, especially if she's never put any of this in writing." I asked her what she suggested. She told me. The opening was on a Saturday. I know because Cecilia texted me that morning to ask how I was doing, and I told her I was fine and I was mostly telling the truth. I'd made my peace with not being there. What I had not made my peace with was everything else. That same Saturday morning, I went to a FedEx office and I had a letter notarized. It was a formal request, drafted with Dais's help, for a written loan agreement acknowledging the $37,000 transfer, setting out repayment terms, and clarifying my status as lease guarantor. It was not aggressive. It was not emotional. It was just paper doing what paper does, making things real. I sent it certified mail to the salon's business address. Then I went home and I watched a movie and I ate leftover soup, and I did not think about what was happening 11 miles away at a ribbon cutting I hadn't been invited to. She received the letter on Monday. She called me Monday evening. The opening must have gone well because I could hear it in her voice still, that brightness, that the dream is actually happening feeling. And then the brightness went out like someone flipping a switch. "What is this?" she said. I told her it was a formal request. I told her calmly what it covered. "You're suing me?" I said I wasn't suing her. I was asking for what any bank or investor would have asked for before writing a check. I had just been slow about the timing. "Mom," her voice cracked, "I can't believe you're doing this right now, right after the opening. Do you know how hard I worked?" I let her finish. Then I said, "I know how hard you worked, baby. And I know how hard I worked. And I know that I gave you everything I had in that savings account so that you could have this. I'm not asking you to pay me back tomorrow. I'm asking you to put it in writing that you know I did that. That's all I'm asking." Silence. Why does it need to be in writing? I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the Christmas party. I thought about completely independently. I thought about the opening I hadn't been invited to because I was complicated. "Because I'm your mother," I said, "and I should be real to you, even on paper." She didn't call me back for 5 days. I won't pretend those 5 days were easy. There's a particular kind of silence from a child that's different from any other silence in the world. It sits in your chest. I kept my hands busy. More cleaning, more cooking than I needed, a lot of long walks in the evening when the air was still cool. On the 4th day, I drove past her salon. I didn't go in. I just drove past slowly and looked at it through the window. The gold lettering on the glass, the plant she'd arranged in the display window, the little chalkboard sign on the sidewalk. It was beautiful. She'd made something beautiful. I drove home and I allowed myself to cry. First time since the phone call when she told me not to come. I cried for about 20 minutes, and then I washed my face and I made dinner. The 5th day she called. She was at the salon, I could tell. I heard the quiet hum of a blow-dryer somewhere in the background, and then a door close, and then just her breathing. "I've been thinking," she said. I waited. "I talked to Trevor." She paused. He said you have a point, legally, and I just..." Another pause. "I've been sitting with it, and I think I've been doing something that I haven't wanted to look at." I said, "Tell me." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said slowly, like the words were being pulled up from somewhere deep, that she had been ashamed. Not of me, or not exactly, but of the gap between where she came from and where she was trying to go, and that somehow it had been easier to, she said, manage the narrative, and I think she meant pretend, but she's always been better at business language than plain language. She said, "I told Trevor's parents that I built the business on my own savings." I asked her if she'd told Trevor that too. A long pause. "Yes." I sat with that. "I think," I said carefully, "that the problem with building a story on something that isn't true is that you have to keep building. You have to keep adding to it. And eventually you're standing in a building that looks nothing like your real life. And you're exhausted and you don't even know why." She started crying then, which made me start crying, which I hadn't planned on. I told her I wasn't angry. I meant it. I was. And I told her this. I was sad. There's a difference. Angry is about what happened. Sad is about what it means. What it means is that my daughter had been so afraid of where she came from that she'd made me invisible, and invisible is the loneliest thing a mother can be. "I don't want you to be invisible," she said. She was crying hard now. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." We met the following Saturday, the Saturday after the one I had been invited to. She opened the salon early before any clients came, and she let me in through the front door with the gold lettering, and she showed me everything. It was even more beautiful inside. She'd done the details herself. The wallpaper she'd painstakingly hung. The vintage mirrors she'd found at an estate sale. The little framed photos of women through the decades whose hair told whole stories about their lives. She'd thought about every inch of it. I stood in the middle of it, and I felt something complicated. Proud and sad at the same time, which I've learned is just what it feels like to be a mother sometimes. She made us both coffee. We sat in her styling chairs, which was silly and felt right, and we talked for 2 hours. Real talk. The kind we hadn't had since she was in her 20s and still called me when things went wrong instead of when she needed something. She told me about Trevor, that she'd told him the truth now, all of it, that he'd taken it better than she expected, that his mother, apparently, had grown up working class herself and never talked about it, and something about that made Renata feel less alone. We talked about the loan agreement. She said she'd have her accountant drop something formal and fair. I told her I didn't care about the money, not really. She said she knew. She said that's exactly why she wanted to put it in writing. Because I deserved to be acknowledged, not just helped. I asked her why she'd been embarrassed. Really, not the polished version, the real one. She thought about it a long time. Because when people look at me, she said, I want them to see what I built. And I was afraid that if they saw where I started, they'd see that instead. I told her, where you started is part of what you built. You can't have one without the other. She looked at me for a moment and then she said quietly, I know that now. That was 4 months ago. The loan agreement is signed. Repayment starts in January, modest amounts, structured so it doesn't strain her in the first years when a small business is still fragile. It's not about the money, and I think she knows that. It's about the record, the proof that I was there, that I am real. She calls me more now. Not every day. She's 36. She has a life, and I don't need every day. But enough. Enough that when the phone rings on a Tuesday afternoon and I'm sitting down to take my shoes off, I don't brace myself anymore. Last month, she posted something on her salon Instagram. A photo of the two of us taken in one of those vintage mirrors she found at the estate sale, her arms around me from behind, both of us looking at our reflections. The caption said, Everything I built started with this woman. I just wasn't always brave enough to say so. I don't know how many people saw it. I know I did. I read it standing in my kitchen at the little crack in the countertop I still haven't fixed, and I thought, there she is. There's my girl. That's the one I've been waiting for. I keep thinking about that crack in my countertop. I've walked past it 1,000 times and told myself I'd fix it, and then I never did. I don't know why I'm thinking about it now, except that maybe it reminds me of something. The way small things you ignore have a way of just staying there, waiting for you to be ready to deal with them. I spent a long time not dealing with what was happening between Renata and me. Not because I didn't see it. I saw it at that Christmas party when she told a stranger she'd done it all on her own. I saw it in the way she watched me when Trevor's friends were in the room. I saw it every time I made an excuse not to show up somewhere so she wouldn't have to be uncomfortable. I told myself I was being sensitive. I told myself it was her moment and I should be gracious about it. But here's what I've learned. Looking away from something that's hurting you is not the same as being gracious. It's just postponing the reckoning. And reckonings have a way of finding you eventually, whether you're ready or not. What changed things was not the confrontation. It was a decision I made quietly at my dining room table, reading through paperwork, asking myself what kind of woman I actually was. Not what kind of mummer. I knew that. I had the bank transfer records to prove it. But what kind of woman? Did I have the clarity to name what was real, and the backbone to ask for to be acknowledged? That's the part people don't talk about enough. It's not enough to love your children well. You have to be honest with them, especially, when the honesty is uncomfortable. Renata needed me to be honest with her not because I was angry, but because the story she was building on a foundation of half-truths was going to collapse eventually. And it was better for it to collapse now, gently, with her mother sitting across from her, than later when the damage was harder to repair. I also had to be smart about it. I could have shown up at that salon on opening day and made a scene. I could have called Trevor's family myself. I could have let the hurt push me into something I'd regret. Instead, I sat with the days and I read the paperwork and I found the proper way to ask for what was right. Not as a wounded mother, but as a woman who understood that the same determination it took to save $41,000 on a nurse's salary was the same determination that could hold a difficult situation together without breaking it. And then I had to hold on. 5 days of silence from my own child. 5 days of not knowing. That takes something. I'm not going to dress it up. It takes the kind of endurance that doesn't announce itself, just gets up in the morning, repots the African violets, takes the long walk in the evening, keeps going. What came out the other side was real, not perfect, not a fairy tale. Renata still has work to do on herself, and so do I probably. But when she posted that photo of the two of us in the mirror, when she chose on her own to say out loud that I was part of what she built, that was her doing the right thing, not because she was forced to, but because she'd grown enough to want to. That's all any of us can ask for, from ourselves or the people we love. You can't force someone to have integrity. You can only be honest enough and wise enough and strong enough to give them the chance to find it themselves.